And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Friday, June 27th, 2025. And to set things up, we still have, generally speaking, broad low-pressure circulation over the Gulf, North Pacific region, and also out here back toward the Bering. Just within this broad area has generally been low pressure. And it's been, temperatures have been a little cooler along with some areas of rain, and this is going to continue. In fact, weak low pressure circulation will be over the Gulf through the weekend into early next week. We'll find a little stronger low coming off the Kamchatka Peninsula and make a northeastward movement towards St. Lawrence Island by Monday. What that is going to do is push in some warmer air with rain and windy conditions that'll press along all of the west coast as we get into Sunday later afternoon and night, and especially by the time we get into early Monday morning, we'll see rather widespread rain along the west coast with breezy conditions. But before then, interior will continue to see some scattered showers and isolated thunderstorms. As we get into Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, there's going to be additional moisture come in from northwest Canada that'll enhance the potential for some showers that could have heavier rainfall, especially from around the 40-mile Gold Country, upper half of the Tanana Valley, eastern half of the Alaska Range. But for Saturday morning to start out, we have low cloudiness, low stratus, along with some fog hugging along the Arctic coast down through the Chukchi Sea and then out toward St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew. We also find some IFR conditions. There are going to be some showers, weakening front trough coming up across the Panhandle. So Saturday morning we expect some areas of IFR throughout a good portion of the Panhandle, and then perhaps an isolated thunderstorm up around the 40-mile Gold Country. There'll still be enough instability, and as we go through the Saturday afternoon, the threat of scattered storms will expand further northwestward all along the Brooks Range either side, even into parts of the North Slope and down here and through the Yukon Flats, and again the higher hill country, White Mountains down toward the 40-mile Gold Country. But right now it's looking like Saturday afternoon, pretty extensive IFR conditions in the Panhandle, and then back to the west through the Bering Strait, just off of the Seward Peninsula and YK deltas, as well as just north of the lower portion of the Alaska Range. IFR conditions there through the eastern Aleutians, and then also out back toward the western Aleutians. For Sunday morning, could be an isolated thunderstorm ongoing up there around Arctic Village, northern portion of the Yukon Flats. Still IFR over a good portion of the southeast Panhandle, and generally VFR conditions across a fair amount of the interior. But again, as we get along the Arctic coast, down along the Chukchi Sea coast, and then surrounding Norton Sound, all the way down through the lower Yukon Delta, IFR conditions expected along the eastern Bering, and again further west out along especially the western half of the Aleutians. Sunday afternoon we'll see some scattered showers and embedded thunderstorms from the southeast slopes of the Brooks Range all the way down across Yukon Flats, the higher terrain surrounding especially north and east of Fairbanks, and coming on down into the upper Tanana Valley. IFR conditions are expected to expand a bit westward from the Panhandle to along the northeastern Gulf Coast, from around Yakutat all the way back toward Prince William Sound and the eastern Kenai. And we continue to see low stratus and fog along the Arctic coast, Chukchi Sea coastline through the Bering Strait, and then extending southwestward all the way out, especially to the central and western Aleutians. And that is in response to that moist system and low pressure with breezy conditions and rain pushing across the central Bering as we get into later Sunday and Monday. But in the meantime, for Saturday, Anaktuvuk Pass VFR conditions. There could be an isolated thunderstorm in vicinity of the pass. Same thing at again, VFR throughout Saturday, but there could be an isolated shower thunderstorm develop within the vicinity of the pass. Lake Clark, Merrill, generally VFR conditions holding there along the Alaska Range. In fact, as we round the Alaska Range, Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, all the way over toward Isabel and Mentasta passes, we're looking at generally VFR conditions for Saturday. Coming down across the Copper River Basin, generally VFR conditions there at Tanita Pass, and Portage Pass should also see VFR conditions for Saturday. Up into the northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White are anticipating some lower ceilings. There are IFR conditions expected for Saturday. And then looking at the freezing levels, starting with the surface freezing line in the morning, it's down there through the Chukchi Sea along areas and just off the Chukchi Sea coastline, but then kind of coming on right along the Beaufort Sea coast. So places like Point Thompson and so forth could see readings right around or a degree or so below freezing. As we go up in the lower mid-levels of the atmosphere, we find higher freezing levels above 8,000 feet over the northern Bering, northern central mainland into northwest Canada. Little cooler freezing levels aloft below 6,000 feet over the western central Gulf, Kodiak Island. And then as we go further west, we find freezing levels rise back up around and above 10,000 feet along the central western Aleutians, because there is warmer, moist air off this way. That's what's going to get pushed northeastward as we go through the latter half of Sunday and into Monday, and that'll eventually get up along all of the west coast for Sunday night and especially into Monday morning. Saturday, we are going to see the frontal system trough kind of rotating back like this, so there could be some moderate icing above 10,000 feet over the panhandle and the thicker cloud cover that's producing areas of rain and rain showers. As we come back to the west, perhaps some isolated areas of moderate icing above 8,000 feet, western Gulf up through Cook Inlet, especially here the west arm of the Alaska Range toward Lake Iliamna. But then out over the Bering, we find there could be some moderate icing above 10,000 feet near St. Matthew, and then way back out toward the western Aleutians above 12,000 feet. And the upper level jet stream winds are pretty quiet here across much of the mainland. We do find southwest flow with 110 knot jet core south of the Gulf in the North Pacific, taking aim toward lower Haida Gwaii and the British Columbia coast, Vancouver Island. Then behind me, this trough that's kind of sitting within this region, we have a northwest to north flow coming down across the central Aleutians upwards of 70 knots or so. At mid-levels, 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, still relatively light winds across most of the mainland. We have circulation here within the Gulf, and we find winds upwards of even 35 knots coming into the lower portion of the Panhandle and Haida Gwaii and along the mountains here, British Columbia, generally from a southwesterly direction, 35 knots. Back to the west, you see hints of that stronger system coming in, approaching the far western Aleutians and begin to come off the Kamchatka coast with westerly winds upwards of 60 knots. And then at 3,000 feet, we find some winds that could be as much as 35 to 45 knots in here through southern parts of the Panhandle, generally from the southwest, associated with this weakening occluded front trough that's attached to this low, because there's just a broad low circulation up through the mid-levels of the atmosphere. Back to the west, this more potent compact low is going to come east-northeastward up through the western Bering and heading toward St. Lawrence Island by Monday. So this feature is going to bring in a front with some moderate to even locally heavier rain. I would anticipate that there'd be some gale force winds around that system. So that'll be a little something we'll take a closer look at over the weekend as we get a little closer to that time frame. But in the meantime, with the front that's coming up here into the Panhandle, we could find some moderate turbulence surface to 6,000 feet, especially from areas around Sitka and inland, even to Petersburg down through Metlakatla, and certainly Prince of Wales Island, Dixon Entrance area. And then back to the west, there could be an area of moderate turbulence, surface to 4,000 feet, eastern Aleutians around Dutch Harbor, and further west, we find way out in the western Aleutians, especially Kiska toward Shimia. There may also be some moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet on Saturday.